Okay, in this video, we're going to look at calculated items as opposed to calculated fields. So in terms of actually illustrating what a calculated item is, we're going to create a new pivot table. So remember, all our different customers were in a particular region, right? So let's just assume that we insert a new pivot table. And we're going to do it in a new page, use the existing settings, and we'll add in the region. And let's just add in the sales amount, just a very simple one. And that's the sale for the full period for all 3 years. Now remember, when you create a calculated field, it effectively creates a new field that gets added to this field area over here, which you can then add into the different areas. Now, the way to think about a calculated item as opposed to calculated field is that a calculated item will look at the values in a particular field. So for example, within the region field, we have these 4 values: eastern, northern, southern, and western region. So it's not a field, but it's the values within a particular field. So the field is basically region, but in that field we have different values. So let's go ahead and assume that we wanted to create a calculation of the the northern and the southern region as one group and the eastern and the western as another, for argument's sake. So the way we would do that is we would go into the pivot table. We would then go into the fields option over here, and instead of selecting calculated field, we're now going to select calculated item, and you can see the difference. So what happens now is, instead of just listing all the fields and being able to do a calculation on the field, when we select a field that's already listed here, it'll show us the items in that particular field. So what values are in that field, and we can use these values to effectively create a new, to create a formula. So let's do this. Let's say we're saying region 1, and let's say region 1 is made up of the northern plus the southern. I'm just double clicking on southern, and I say okay, and you can see it's added region 1. So this is the difference. A calculated item will sit as a value here, listed as one of the values, like the other items, whereas a field would typically be within a column or within the major row itself. All right, so we've got region 1, and let's now go ahead and do region 2 as well. So we just go in here and we say calculated item again, and for region 2 we're going to make it the eastern and the western, right? So we go and we just say this is the eastern region plus the western region, right? And we say okay. Now the one thing you should note is that the grand totals will now get double counted, because region 1 and region 2 are basically made up of these numbers here. So including these, including all of them and calculating a grand total is going to result in an incorrect number, because that's typically going to be a double counted number. Now if we only wanted to show region 1 and region 2 and we didn't want to show these 4, we could do a filter. Dropping down on the filter, we could basically deselect everything and only show those 2 regions, and we would now have this view, which is basically going to be the total amount, but it's going to be correct. That is going to be the total sales over all of the periods. But the moment we include, we have to be careful, because if we included any of the other regions, we would be double counting. So that's just giving you one example of how you would use a calculated item. So the key point I do want to make is that when you're thinking of calculated items, think of when you are not working a calculation on the actual field itself, but within the values within that field. So for example, within this particular pivot table that we had earlier, if we wanted to, for example, work out a total for fruit and veg, like we did in an earlier video, but instead of grouping it, we could, for example, create one calculated item that's made up of the fruit plus the vegetable. So you can do a formula based on these. So the other thing I want to show you is that when you come into this list here of the fields and the items, we've already covered calculated fields and calculated items. You also have this option called solve order. And solve order just basically says what order should it work out these formulas. Now region 1 and region 2 are not dependent on each other, but if they were, and let's assume region 2 needed to be calculated first because region 1 was dependent on region 2's calculation, you would move region 2 up. So you can set the order in which the calculated items are determined. However, if they're independent of each other, so it doesn't matter which one is calculated first, in this particular instance it won't matter. So that's the one thing you should know in terms of the order. And then if I click on this drop down, if you click on this list formulas over here, what it'll do, it'll open up a brand new sheet, and in that sheet it will show you what all the calculated items are. It'll give you the solve order, and it will show you the formulas as well. So that's just so that, you know, if you get somebody else's spreadsheet typically, or if you may have developed a spreadsheet a long time ago when you can't really remember all the details, this is a quick way to get a visual view of all the calculated items that are being used in that pivot table.